Hey everybody, and welcome back to month 2 of our Lady of Shalott project. This month it's all about applique. Now I use a raw edge fuse technique that is stitched down using the double blanket stitch on my Bernina. I also suggest a single blanket stitch. If you don't have that, you could use a satin stitch if that's your preferred method. And for those of you that like stitching by hand, I don't have a problem with that either. You may have to make some design alterations because doing these really deep V's and really sharp points are harder to do when you're turning seam allowance under and stitching down by hand. At any rate, I'm going to show you how I do this, and I hope that you'll find it great for your project. One of the things that I tend to do is to use a Sharpie marker or a marker that will bleed through to the back side so that you can see the design in reverse, because essentially you copy the reverse design. In a Rhapsody quilt though, because there's 4 of each, you could do 4 of this side and 4 of the other side. As long as you do 4 of each, you're going to be just fine. Using the manufacturer's instruction for your preferred fusible, trace the design onto the release paper of the fusible. Now I use Steam-A-Seam 2. There are other products that work really great. For this particular design, I have actually drawn the little accent pieces, although I won't be cutting them out. I just want you to remember that they are there. I've also made these lines cut into the applique because that's what they are on the design. We will not cut into that area. We will only snip on the edges of the fabric. We will sew into the applique with the stitching. Once you've got the fusible on the back side of your fabric, cut out the design. Once the design is cut out, if you use a pin, you can score the paper side without compromising the edge of the fabric. Simply peel the paper off the back. Position the applique exactly where it should go onto the piece and iron according to the manufacturer's instructions for your fusible. I use Ricky Tim Stable Stuff Poly as my stabilizer, and I think it's important that you use a stabilizer. Just simply put it underneath your unit and cut out enough that will cover underneath the applique. Ricky Tim Stable Stuff Poly is a polyester-based stabilizer. In the end, you would be leaving polyester fibers inside your quilt instead of paper. Now let me show you how I'm actually going to begin. I start my stitches with a straight stitch, and then I switch to either the double blanket stitch or the single blanket stitch to do the stitching. Then I can turn the corners and stitch all the way around the project. When I come to the end, I then go back to the straight stitch to finish. For this technique, you must use an open toe embroidery foot or applique foot. It has a groove underneath that allows the stitches to go under. Regardless of the brand of machine you're using, you'll need to set your machine up for stitching. On my Bernina, I navigate to some of the quilt stitch functions, and in that bank, I find the single blanket stitch and the double blanket stitch. Fortunately, I also have a straight stitch in that bank, and those are the stitches I'll be using. I'll either use the straight stitch and the double blanket stitch or the straight stitch and the single blanket stitch. It's up to you. Of course, the single blanket stitch goes a little bit faster than the double blanket stitch. On my single stitch, I want to make sure that it's 2.0 in length, and in this case that is the default, but if it wasn't, I would make that adjustment. I also notice that the needle is in the center position, and I'm going to move that needle 1 to the right. Now on your machine it might be 2 to the right, and you'll understand why this needle needs to be slightly moved in a moment. On the single blanket stitch, if that's what I'm going to use, I want to look at the length and width. In this case, it's not where I want it. I want to dial it down to 2.0 wide by 2.0 in length. The 2.0 length and wide is millimeters, and that's the same thing that I'm going to do for the double blanket stitch. I'm going to dial that down to 2.0 by 2.0 as well. Now those are my preferences. If you make samples before you actually get started on your project, you might find that you like a little bit bigger stitch, but that's the size of the stitch that I am used to using for this project. So now I also want to finally check my tension. Now different machines have different places to adjust the tension, but on this machine I noticed that the stitch is far too tight, so I'm going to dial this down to a 2.0. That is significantly looser tension than is normal for sewing, but this means that your top thread will pull through to the bottom side. I'm going to look at that single blanket stitch. I notice that it's a 2.25, which is pretty good, but I'm still going to select that and dial it down to a 2.0, and it will look beautiful. To begin stitching, I start with my straight stitch where the needle is slightly moved to the right, and then go to the double blanket stitch. And then when I begin stitching now, I simply stitch following the edge of the fabric, keeping my forward and back stitches touching but not penetrating the edge of the fabric. Now when I come to a sharp point, I'm going to slow down and watch. Forward, back, forward, left, right, forward, back, stop. Pivot, and it's ready for a left, right, pivot, and it's ready to move forward, back, forward, and you can simply continue. I do not dial the stitch down to a smaller width when I'm turning a sharp point. I simply use that technique, and you'll see that same procedure again in just a moment. So now it's time for us to come into a very sharp inside point. I come up to forward, back, forward, and then we have left, right, stop, reset your stitch and pivot, and then it will hop and go left, right. So again, pivot and reset the stitch by simply touching it. It will hop and then left, right. I love doing these inside sharp points with that technique. You don't have to reset the stitch for the outside where we are right now. Again, it's pivot and left, right, pivot again, and it's ready for forward, back, forward. You only have to reset that stitch when you're coming into the inside sharp point, not the outside pointy bit. Now I've opted in this video to let you just watch how I go around all of these points so that you can really learn it. Rather than editing it down so it's so quick, I just want you to see what it looks like. Here we go. Forward, back, left, right, forward, back, forward, pivot. Don't reset the stitch, just left, right, and pivot, and come out of that by stitching over the stitches that you've just created. Now we're coming to one of those spots where we have stitching going into the applique rather than on the edge of the applique. So, change to your straight stitch, stitch along the imaginary curve. If you want to mark those, you can. And then simply pivot around, switch back to your double blanket stitch, and come out of it. By using your thread in this manner, you can really enhance the look of your applique by stitching into and on the applique with your stitches. Left, right, forward, back, forward, pivot, left, right, right over the stitches you just took, and now it's forward, back, forward, and I do a little pivot to get back on track, and then continue. When you're going around these easy curves, you can just scooch along and drive. If you've got tight inside curves or tight outside curves, you will need to take time to pivot a lot. Now here's our last inside sharp point. One more time. Forward, back, forward, back, forward. Left, right. Pivot, reset the stitch. It will hop and go left, right. Reset or pivot, reset the stitch, and it will hop and left, right. Continue on, and now we're going to come to the end, stitching over the stitches where we started to secure them so they won't come undone, and come right up to it's in the middle and end. Forward, back, forward. Go back to your straight stitch and do about 6 to 8 straight stitches right along the edge. Cut the threads and you'll see how beautiful this start and stop is. You can't even really tell where the project started and stopped. Here are the inside sharp point. And here's the beautiful stitching going into the applique. And then look at those sharp outside points. Both of those, they look great. So there's a few loose ends that I want to mention before we end this particular video. Number one, I want you to practice your stitches on samples before you actually start working on your master quilt. If you will master these techniques, you will feel so much more comfortable working on your quilt without worrying that you might ruin it. So practice. Number two, I want to tell you that different machines, different brands may have a double blanket stitch that behaves differently than the one you just saw. For example, I know brands that go forward, left, right, forward, left, right. And if it's going to do that, then make your adjustments so that your stitch is 1 by 2. So the 1 and plus 1 is 2, and then it jumps over by 2. Another thing people ask me is, do I ever have problem with a fusible gunking up my machine, gumming up the needle? The truth of the matter is, occasionally I will notice when I'm using a lot of fusible that as the needle goes up and down, suddenly there starts to be this little glob that gets on the needle. I reach up and I just pull it off, I wipe it on my pants and move on. Seriously, I have never had a problem with the machine getting gummed up to the point that it doesn't work, it doesn't behave, or it breaks stitches. It's just not been my experience, so I've had a lot to do with that. And lastly, I want to tell you about the hop stitch that you saw in this video. When I set my Bernina to the stitch, when I reset the stitch, the first thing that it does is hop and then left, right. I know this, but over some of the Bernina models, there was a change in the software or the internal workings of the stitch where instead of hopping, it went forward 1 stitch. If your machine goes forward on the first stitch, simply hold your fabric sturdy so that the feed dogs cannot grab and move it forward. So hold it, and that forward will be a hop. The other thing you might want to do is go take your machine in, because I believe many of those machines are being updated so that they do the hop. No matter, you can hold it and it will not hop, or if it just hops, then you're good to go. I hope you've enjoyed this month. I look forward to seeing your applique, and next month we're going to start piecing this puppy together. See you then.